As we try to know more of God, we see that he's introduced to us as this all-powerful, all-wise creator. And then he moves into this next stage where we see him as a father, disciplining his children, trying to help his children share in his holiness, which we lose whenever we sin and rebel against him. And at the end of Genesis chapter 11, you got to be thinking, man, this is not going so well for God. I mean, he created this great world and all that, but his people have just rejected him. And really, not only have his people rejected him, but he looks pretty harsh too, and pretty bad at this point in the story. Does God really care, or what's going on here? In Genesis chapter 12, we're introduced to one of God's friends, who is called that by God in the Bible. A man who at first his name is Abram, and later will become Abraham. And when God comes to Abraham, he makes some promises to him. He tells Abraham in Genesis chapter 12 that he's going to make him a great nation. Abraham didn't have any kids at the time, by the way, and he was 75 years old. He told him he was going to give him a land that was a wonderful, beautiful land that would be fruitful. He told Abraham that he would be great among the nations, that anybody who blessed him would be blessed, anybody who cursed him would be cursed. And he said that through him, through Abraham, all the nations would be blessed. Which is a pretty incredible thing, because so far all that had happened was the nations seemed to be getting cursed by their father, who was disciplining them continually. So, is this true? Now, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. He had a right relationship with God because he believed in the promises of God. He believed that God is faithful. That's sort of a question all throughout the Bible. Is God faithful? He makes these promises, but is he faithful to them? For instance, he promised Abraham a land, but Abraham actually died without ever owning even a foot of land. And Abraham's son, Isaac, and his son, Jacob, did the same thing. As a matter of fact, Jacob died in another country, in Egypt, where one of Jacob's sons was one of the great leaders of that nation. And then at 400 years, about 430 years, Abraham's descendants were in that land of Egypt, and they became slaves. So this nation who God had promised would be great, and people would bless, and all these wonderful things would happen to, they became a nation of slaves. And it was at that time that they cried out to God. And I love what Exodus chapter 2 and verses 23 through 25 says. It says that the people in their affliction, they cried out to God, and God saw their affliction, and he heard their cry. And God remembered the covenant that he made with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. You know what God did? God delivered them out of that. And God brought them to a land of promise. And God made that nation great. And even hundreds and hundreds of years later, centuries later, there was salvation brought to all the earth. Blessing brought to all the earth through that man, Abraham. Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. He came to bless all nations, to be the blessing that God had promised to Abraham. You know, back in Abraham's day, we would have questioned, is God really faithful? I should say, maybe today, you question, is God faithful to his promises? Is he going to take care of me? Does he care about me? Does he love me? Those are good questions. And sometimes it seems like he's not faithful. And when we try to get to know God, we think, I don't know if I want to know this God, because he seems like someone who I wouldn't want to know. But if we could understand patience and faith in the faithfulness of God, and if we could learn that by looking at the gospel story that God, centuries after he promised to Abraham all these great blessings, he brought them to pass in his son Jesus. If we could understand that, then it would help us to have greater faith. We can understand the words of Romans chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, where it says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes," for the Jew first and also to the Greek. In other words, to everybody can have this salvation, can trust that God is faithful. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith. In other words, from God's faithfulness to faith. In other words, so that you can have faith in the God who is faithful. As it is written, the righteous, like Abraham, the friend of God, shall live by faith. Know God better. Know his faithfulness. Trust in him. And keep reaching upward together toward heaven.